this emotional experience in our body is actually driving and dictating our thoughts of the situation.
Thank you, Luke. So that actually brings me back to the topic of porn, and I don't know how much you've followed or been in touch with any of your participants, but I am curious to know how their relationships shifted after they developed more awareness and more compassion for themselves around their porn use.
That's a great question. So again, every person is different, every context is different, every person's on their own journey. But what one of the research findings was that acceptance was one of the magical keys to uh, move away from the rumination that was being caused by porn. So a lot of the shame and guilt perpetuated rumination on porn. So there was self-judgment. When the participants, and not all of them, when some of the participants, a few of the participants, many of the participants, I'm not sure what proportion it was, when they were beginning to accept themselves to a greater degree, their the rumination on porn dropped off significantly, and so did their porn use. So many of them described by the end of the study that I now view less, far less, like significant reductions. But what they said, which was important, was that but now they choose to watch porn, and before it wasn't a choice. So that was one of the reasons most of the men came to the study, said that they weren't choosing to watching porn. They were watching it because of this uncontrollable reaction to stress, and because they felt they had no control over it, which was one of the reasons that it eroded their sense of autonomy and sense of self. When they grew to accept themselves and their porn use, when they did choose to watch porn as a conscious choice, they were no longer burdened by the shame and the guilt. So it was unique that the antidote wasn't abstinence, it was acceptance. And acceptance for some meant the commitment to abstinence, and some it meant just a more conscious relationship. The greatest impact of all was the relationship with themselves, which arguably is the most important relationship, because how we relate to ourselves is how we're going to relate to the external world as well.
I'm sure for anyone who is familiar or maybe not familiar with Gabor Mate's work, he started kind of developed his work here in Vancouver on the downtown east side, working with clients who were very complex, had very complex addictions and trauma. And again, it seems like any of those things that we reach for, a lot of it is the shame. Even people with major addictions, the more they're able to connect with themselves, even though the brain chemistry, they might have a physical addiction, that starts to drop off as well.
Yes, and I think that that's one of the reasons why, well, the hardest of hardcore drug addicts don't start with those substances, just like in the world of porn. It's not until some of the men that reached out to me for support within the research in the program was because the first sign that distressed them was that they were no longer watching porn that they had started with. All of a sudden, their tastes and the things that they were finding sexually arousing were things that were distressing to them, whether it was certain fetishes, whether it was rape porn, whether it was being attracted to just different, questioning their sexuality because of the porn that they were finding themselves attracted to. So that was again the sign that the human organism and the nervous system begins to seek these harder and harder or more unique or more stimulating versions of the substance and the behavior that we're leaning on to soothe and support ourselves emotionally.
Mhm. So it's interesting. I have a therapist, and I've dated men who've had problems with porn that impacted our relationship. And it wasn't coming from me judging their porn use. It was the secrecy, the shame, the unwillingness to talk about it. One even had told me just voluntarily that he had given up watching porn when we met. And I was like, that's cool. If you ever want to watch it, like, I'm not going to restrict you, because I know that me telling you you can't watch porn is going to be the thing that makes you want to watch it. Whenever sort of the topic came about in our world, I'd be like, oh, how's it going with the porn? And he would maintain, oh, I never watch it anymore. I haven't watched it in however long. And each time I would reiterate, well, like, there's no judgment for me. the only thing I would ask is that you be honest. And yet he kept lying about it to me.
Mm.
And then when it all came out and I accidentally happened to find out that not only was he watching porn, but it was like this huge deal, right? Um, he actually tried to say that it was because I was so anti-porn. So it was almost like projecting, like, when did that ever come out of my mouth? Never. And I don't know where I was going with this, but that those thoughts just kind of came to mind, and I'm wondering if you
Well,
have
you're
any thoughts
tapping,
on it. Yeah.
yeah, you're tapping into a common theme that was present in the with the participants. Many of the participants came into the research because it was impacting their relationship with their significant partner, and that secrecy and that lack of transparency led to, again, this increased sense of guilt and shame, but it also created a massive disconnect from the partner. One of the consequences too, again, this was common, was that porn was satisfying a sexual need that then the the partner doesn't get the intimacy, the sex, and the love that they're wanting and needing in the relationship because those needs are being satisfied through porn. Again, this common experience, especially if it's hidden in shame and secrecy. So what you're stumbling upon is would have been almost like a almost accurate account or accurate representation of what can happen from relationship within relationships when there isn't a communication around it, when there isn't honesty around it, and that continued breach of trust, or in this case it was trust, begins to create that wider and wider chasm between the partners.
Thank you. And I believe reading in your study, there were some participants who did feel judgment from their partner and were shamed by their
Yep,
partner. But then
yep.
there were also people whose partner was very supportive and encouraging and didn't have an issue, and yet they still felt that internalized need to be secretive and feel ashamed.
Yes. Well, again, it's not the responsibility of the partner to soothe or be the therapist for the person that is addicted to porn or has a problematic relationship with porn. However, it doesn't understate or it doesn't diminish the unique role that this person does have in the process of healing. So I would say that couples therapy is important when porn is an issue, because the porn use isn't just impacting, in this case, the man, it's also impacting the female in terms of the beliefs that are triggered, in terms of the trauma that's triggered, in terms of the confusion that's triggered. That also needs to be reconciled, and it needs to be held with respect and acknowledgement and validation, because that nervous system plays a key role in how the other person moves through this experience of problematic porn use. A vital role. So I think yeah, I think that's all I'll say on that for now.